When you look at the best keyboard and mouse players in Warzone, they all have one trait in common, and that's great aim. Now, when it comes to settings, the thing that influences the most, obviously, is your sensitivity. So what I wanted to do is look at all of the top players and compare their sensitivities and their other settings that influence this and see, is there a best sensitivity in Warzone or a so-called God sense? So I went out and did just that. I compiled a list of 28 of the best Warzone players that play mouse and keyboard with the help of my Twitter. And I do want to say really quick that I'm sure I left some people off on this, so I apologize. This is not like a super exclusive, absolute like ranking of the best players. If there's anyone that you feel like I left off that should be talked about, that has great aim and is a great Warzone player on mouse and keyboard, please feel free to let me know in the comments though. So here it is. I've got 28 of some of the top mouse and keyboard players and their sensitivity converted to centimeters per 360 degrees. Now, a lot of you are probably like, what the heck does that mean? But it's a pretty simple concept. Basically, let's take myself, for example. I play on a sensitivity of 48.9 centimeters per 360 degrees. So it would take me 48.9 centimeters of moving my mouse from left to right to do a 360 degree turn in game. So let's see. There we go. There's a 360. If we were to measure that, and if I would have done it in a perfectly straight line, which it wasn't exact, that would be 48.9 centimeters. Now, the reason I'm using that and not just in-game sensitivity is because depending on your DPI, you can have a totally different DPI and in-game sensitivity, but at the end of the day, your sensitivity could be the same. So let's take a quick step back and explain this so you guys understand how sensitivity is actually calculated. There's two main factors that go into this. Number one is DPI, or dots per inch. This is your actual mouse's sensitivity, and this is set usually in a program by the developer of your mouse. So for example, I'm playing on a Logitech G Pro X Superlight. I have a Logitech software that I can change my DPI in. A lot of you guys probably have buttons on your mice that you can hot program the different DPIs. Now, DPI affects your sensitivity outside of your game. So this influences how fast your cursor moves on your desktop. Now, the other thing that obviously creates your sense is your in-game sensitivity. And then your DPI times your in-game sensitivity is going to equal your eDPI, or your effective DPI. So let's look at our graph here. I've got 4 players that they all have the same centimeters per 360 of 43.3 centimeters. Now, I know from when I was gathering this data that Lucci plays on a DPI of 1600 with an in-game sensitivity of 2, whereas Yeet plays on a DPI of only 400, but an in-game sensitivity of 8. But how is their sense the same? And it's simple, it's basic math. 400 DPI times 8 in-game sense is gonna equal an DPI of 3200. For Lucci, he plays 1600 DPI times 2 also equals 3200. So because their eDPI is the same, if they were to like swap setups, let's say Lucci went over and played on Yeet's computer, their sense would feel exactly the same. The only difference would be in the desktop, or let's say like in the buy station menu in Warzone. Lucci, because he's on a high DPI, his is gonna feel really fast and it's gonna be only just little wrist movements to do this. Whereas Yeet, it would still feel very low and he'd be actually having to use kind of his whole arm to move around just within the buy station or on his desktop. And then the reason we use centimeters per 360 is it's kind of like a universal standard when talking about sensitivity. So for example, let's take another game like Valorant or Fortnite or Apex. These have different in-game sensitivity engines or numbers that convert. So an eDPI of 3200 doesn't convert to a different game necessarily because they're different engines. But you can use websites. A good one is mouse-sensitivity.com. You can plug in your game, plug in your DPI and your sense, and you can convert it to a different game and it'll spit out what your in-game sense needs to be, and then it'll spit out the universal centimeters per 360. And I also think this is a very good visual representation of how low or high someone's sense is. So if you look here, you're gonna see that the majority of the players are, if we go here, 28.3 centimeters is Pieman. 28 centimeters, I bet to a lot of people watching this video is a lot lower than the majority of people watching. When people come to me and they say, what can I do to have better aim? What's the best sensitivity? 9 times out of 10, they're playing on a sensitivity way higher than 28.3 centimeters. Most people that come to me are playing in a sense more around this range. So we got Metaphor here at 16, Corrupt playing only at 4 centimeters. Now these are some absurdly high sensitivities, especially when you look at Corrupt. And I'm not saying that you can't have good aim with a very high sense, but it's obvious to see that of these players that I gathered, which I think we got a lot of the great players in the game that play mouse and keyboard, the vast majority are very low sense. If you look at some of the notable names on this list, Tfue, Huskerrs, Symfuhhny, Iron, all of these people, they're all 40 centimeters plus. And what I would encourage you guys to do if you play on a normal to high sensitivity, try playing on a sense like this and get a feel for what it feels like. I think a really great place to start is the median, which is actually this 43.3 centimeters, which was our example earlier, would be 1600 DPI and an in-game sense of 2, and try to feel how slow that feels compared to what you were used to playing on. Now there are absolutely downsides of playing low sensitivity though. The biggest thing is it takes a lot of movement to be able to quickly turn. So if we jump in game here, basically, if I want to do a turn, I mean, I'm using my whole arm. So for me to do a 360, I am completely swiping my mouse. Whereas if you're playing high sense, you could probably just do a flick of the wrist. But the major benefit to playing low sense is for me to aim in this window, I can move my wrist around a good bit and be very accurate. Whereas if you were very high sense, you're literally just moving your fingers just to stay there. But the benefit of being on a high sense is those big turns are very easy and you can very quickly flick almost effortlessly because it's only the movement of your wrist instead of your whole arm. When you hear a controller player and they say, but you have your whole arm to aim, it should be so easy. I think a lot of people are limiting themselves because they're playing on a lot faster sense. So if I go up to 10, I'm on 1600 DPI. It's just my wrist here to do these movements. For me to just stay within this window, I mean, it's literally, I'm just moving my fingers. You probably can't even tell that I'm moving my mouse. So you're not using your whole arm when you're on a high sensitivity. When you're on a low sensitivity, like myself, I'm playing at about 49 centimeters. You have so much more surface area to work with, and it's way easier to be precise on these small targets. Now, if we get back to our example of Yeet and Lucci, how they were on different DPIs, different in-game sensitivities, but their eDPI at the end of the day is the same. Is one of theirs better? Lucci being on a high DPI of 1600 with a low in-game sense versus Yeet on a low DPI but a high in-game sense. And the answer is yes. I would argue that Lucci actually has the superior sensitivity. And that's because higher DPIs actually have less latency or less lag from your mouse to your computer. Now, some YouTubers that are a lot smarter than me basically did some research and tested and they found that higher DPIs reduce this latency. So what I would recommend for someone like Yeet with a low DPI is to increase the DPI but decrease the in-game sense so that the eDPI at the end of the day is the same. Now I'll link their video in the description, but basically in short, they found that 1600 DPI and above was like the sweet spot for reducing that latency as much as possible. So even if you watch this video and you decide you don't want to change your sensitivity, and my goal of this video is not to make everyone change their sense by any means, I would recommend if you're on a DPI less than 1600 to increase your DPI to 1600 and convert your in-game sensitivity so that your eDPI is the same. Now, we've covered the main points of sensitivity, but there's still a lot of very important settings here that vary depending on who you are. A big one is going to be your ADS sensitivity multiplier. Now, personally, I play with 1, meaning my sense when I aim and zoom is the same as what it is on hipfire. A lot of people will play on something lower than 1. So something like 0.75 is pretty common. So all that's doing is when I zoom in, my sense is now 75% slower than what it was on my hip fire. Now, from what I found, the vast majority of these players on this list play with an ADS sense of 1, meaning their ADS is the same. And that's what I recommend because of muscle memory. Muscle memory in the aiming community is like a weird topic. It's almost like taboo in a sense. At the end of the day, if you have an ADS multiplier other than 1, it's like you're playing on 2 separate sensitivities. Now, a really good person to use an example though of not playing of a ADS sense of 1 is Tfue. So Tfue plays on a very low sense of 56 centimeters. He also plays with an ADS multiplier of 0.51. So essentially his sensitivity is cut in half when he aims in, meaning his centimeters per 360 when aimed in with a gun is over 100 centimeters. So he's gonna be able to be extremely precise because he's using a ton of surface area to aim when he's zoomed in. But the downside to this is, let's say for example, let's say I'm very close to this person and I'm aimed in trying to track in and they bunny hop over here. If I'm aimed in and my sense is over 100 centimeters, I would have to completely reach around just to go from like here to here. So there are downsides if you play too low. But one thing to talk about specifically when it comes to Tfue is his ADS mouse sensitivity mode. He plays on Legacy. And the majority of people play on relative, and it's what I recommend, but let me explain the difference between these two settings. So let's go to Legacy and let me look at this target here. So watch the edge of my screen. When I zoom in, you see my screen zooms in as well. And I'm playing on 120 FOV affected, meaning my game is gonna try to stay stretched out as much as possible. So, but still, when I zoom in, my field of view decreases. It goes from 120 to, I don't know, maybe like 100 or so. So when you're on Legacy, which is what I am right now, your centimeters per 360 is not going to change when you zoom in. Your sense is going to be the same. And what that does is your sense on your hip fire when you're zoomed out at 125 is gonna feel a lot lower or slower than when you aim in and your FOV is less. Because essentially Legacy is ignoring the change in the zoom. Your sense doesn't change no matter how much you're zoomed in. And this effect is amplified with the higher zoom optic you have. So think of like a 3x scope on an AR. When you're zoomed in on Legacy, your sense will feel a lot faster than what your hip fire sense is. But on relative, what relative does is essentially it keeps your rotation speed the same based on the zoom. So when I zoom in and my FOV decreases, the feeling of what I have to do to go from here to here will be the same hip fire versus zoomed in. So the majority of players do play on relative, and I think that's best for muscle memory because when you zoom in with a scope especially, it'll feel the same. It won't feel like your sense changed. Now, there is a very important number that has to do if you play on relative, and that's your monitor distant coefficient. Now, I've seen a lot of people explain this incorrectly. Some people will say it has to do with your horizontal to vertical like movement. Basically, when I was explaining that example of the 5 centimeters on your monitor, this is how this is determined. All this is it is your horizontal resolution of your monitor divided by your vertical resolution. So I would bet the majority of you are on a 1920 by 1080 monitor. If you take 1920 divided by 1080, you get 1.78. Now I'm on a 1440p monitor, but it's the same aspect ratio of 16 by 9. So it's 2560 divided by 1440 also equals 1.78. Now the default for this is 1.33. But that is incorrect. That is for a 4:3 aspect ratio, which I don't think is a very popular monitor anymore. Now, if you're on like an ultra wide monitor or just like a unique shape, not your standard shaped monitor, this will be different. Big number divided by little number equals your monitor distant coefficient. Now, ADS sensitivity transition timing, if you're playing on a multiplier of 1, technically this doesn't matter. Instant just means as soon as you right click, your ADS sense would change to it, or there's gradual, which would be like a bell curve. As you zoom in, your hip fire sense would change to your ADS sense, or after zoom, it would only apply once you're fully zoomed in. I think instant is best if you're going to use an ADS Sens Multiplier, because as soon as you right click, your hipfire sense would change to whatever your ADS sense is. Now, there are multipliers for other things besides your ADS. The only one I recommend turning up, and I've seen the majority of pros turn this up, is going to be your air vehicle sense. This makes flying the helicopters a lot easier, and especially the planes. I honestly wish this value went way higher than 2. Like, if I could crank this to 5 or 10, I probably would, because that's what's so hard about flying the planes, is especially when you're on a low sense already, you have to like keep pushing and swiping to reset to go up with the planes. So definitely I would recommend turning that all the way up. If you want your ground vehicle sense to be faster, you could, but this affects more just your camera, not the actual turning. I've seen some people that will actually turn down they'll turn up their vertical sense slightly to like 1.1 or 1.2. And some people will claim if you turn it up some, it makes controlling recoil easier because you don't have to pull down as much. I think this is bad, because if you're ever making a vertical style flick where, like, let's say somebody's in this window, if I had to go up, that would be very bad for creating muscle memory, because it would be different. So I would not recommend playing with a vertical sense multiplier, and I really don't think any of the top players play with one either. Now, if we kind of keep going down the line here with some of these settings, the next one, this is new, is custom sensitivity per zoom. Basically, you can change your ADS sense for every different multiplier of zoom. Me personally, I think it's best just to keep it to 1, but just be aware that is there, and the majority of the top players do keep this off and keep everything 1 to 1. Now, invert mouse look on foot would be, this would flip things. So if I push down, it's like an airplane. Pushing up goes down, and pulling back goes up. I would bet money if you play with this inverted, you are older than at least 40, or you're in the military and you have a history of flying planes. I would recommend keeping this off unless your brain works that way. If it does, go for it. I don't know of any like top players that play with that setting on though. You can also do it for ground vehicles and air vehicles. I think it might make sense for some of the air vehicles. I'll be honest, I am horrible at flying the planes on mouse and keyboard, but that might work for some people to kind of process the like pushing up to go down with the plane. Now, these last 3, mouse acceleration, filtering, and smoothing, what this does is if we turn this up, let's just go to like 10. And just putting it on 10 makes it so fast. Essentially, if I'm moving really slow, my sense doesn't change, but as soon as I go, when I apply speed with my mouse, it'll accelerate your sensitivity. If you play with it up a little bit, it can be cool because you can make really, like, you can be accurate and then make cool flicks. But overall, it's horrible for muscle memory, and I don't know of anyone that seriously plays with any of these settings on. Now, if you've watched this video and you're like, I'm gonna change my sensitivity, I'm gonna lower it, and I'm gonna be a great aimer, you're probably gonna struggle at first. That's okay. The biggest thing you're gonna struggle with is making those big turns. You're gonna feel slow and heavy. You need to get used to swiping with your arm. I have a video that I'd highly recommend you checking out if you're considering lowering your sense. Essentially what it is, in short, is it's like speed training where you actually practice on a sense even lower than what you would play. And once you kind of go back to your normal sense, it's gonna feel a lot faster. You can think of it like weight training, like running with a weighted vest, and then when you take it off, you're gonna feel a lot faster. If you found the video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe if you want more videos like this. I've got several other aim videos. I have a whole playlist of aim training videos. We've got a whole bunch of other Warzone stuff like loadouts and tips to get better. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. I hope this video helped, and I hope you guys have some phenomenal aim because of it. Peace.